All right, welcome to Two Sons Podcast. Happy Tuesday, everybody. Hope all of you guys are having a great week. I am sincerely sorry, both of us are sincerely sorry that it took us so long to get to the first 3 episodes of Rings of Power.
We're right on time.
Lots of a confluence of events. A good half of it is just releasing 3-hour-plus long episodes, like literally a solid 3 hours and 20 minutes of content. Like
that's
at the
pretty
same
frustrating.
time, and I texted Luke. Luke texted me because he watched the first episode last night. I watched all 3 today, and Luke texted me last night. And he's like, "Really good first episode." And as soon as I watched the first episode, I texted him this morning, and I'm like, "Why didn't they just stop?"
Yeah,
there?
it would have
I
been.
don't get it.
It was such a great recap from all of season 1. It tied all of the plots together so well. In my opinion, there's no reason to release 3.
Yeah, it was definitely a bizarre way to do it,
was such a
especially
pain.
just the sheer volume of it. And again, I understand from the content space, it's a little different. We're thinking of it from content in the standpoint that we want to capitalize on the urgency of it and get an episode out. But it even I think is unrealistic for people that aren't creating content, because if you're just a fan of the content and it all comes out on a Thursday at a 3-hour set, and it's you happen to be working that day, and then like we talked the other day, if you had to feed your kids and put them to bed, and
you have work,
finally settle down in front of the TV at 8:45, you're not going to be able to watch 3 episodes,
an hour and a half episode, or
and then,
an hour and 15 minutes.
Yeah, and then the next day you're taking a shit and you're scrolling through Instagram and you find out everything that happens. That's
I know.
that's not a good
I
idea.
know. Yeah. By the way, spoilers, but when you see Sauron with perfect flowing hair and blush,
looking like an elf.
Yeah, looking like an elf, and he has blush on his cheeks. It's
I'm
where the hell
excited to
did
get
that
into
come
that.
from? I saw that prior to seeing episode 3 it was, or 2.
Let's that's actually an interesting spot to start. So I remember when Adar showed up in season 1.
Mm-hmm.
I remember immediately, and Luke and I, for the record, we don't profess to be Tolkien experts by any stretch of the imagination.
Not at all.
Star Wars is definitely our wheelhouse, but we definitely
If you're listening to us right now, you're here to hang out.
Yeah, you're here to hang out and talk Rings of Power.
You're here to digest this with us, because we are not experts.
We will
with
not
Lord of
be
the Rings.
quoting passages from the Silmarillion or whatever they call it.
I do have this tattoo, though.
So anyway, I remember doing a bunch of research, and we've done a good amount of research behind the scenes, but not enough to have a full grasp of everything. But the one of the things that I remember looking up when Adar showed up was okay, is that Sauron? And you find out pretty quickly it's not at the end of the season. But I remember as I was researching it, I was looking up, and it was Sauron showed up in many different forms, and he was kind of a shapeshifter, a manipulator. And one of the names that showed up when I was looking him up in season 1 was ANNATAR. And so that was kind of a cool little callback to an actual little piece of Tolkien history there. And so what I found fascinating about that, and again, I don't have a super firm understanding of this, but essentially from what I understand, the Valar are an entity of beings that are of the light, that are above the elves. And I think there's actually another singular entity that's above all of them, if I'm not mistaken. I could be wrong about that, but they're kind of like gods. I think of the Valar kind of like Greek gods. They're
that's a good comp.
They're above the people, but they're they have their kind of personalities and flaws the same way that the Greek gods
one of
did,
them's
right?
really into sex.
And one of them is he just kills people.
Yeah,
all he does.
Another one, he just likes to fight people.
All he does is fight. This dude just chucks lightning bolts.
Yeah. Very cool stuff.
But so the Valar, I thought it was really fascinating when Sauron Halbrand was trying to get in front with Celebrimbor, when he's trying to get in front of the idea of the inevitable group of whether it was going to be messengers or it was going to be an actual messenger party that would come to Eregion to tell Celebrimbor that Sauron was Sauron. You know what I mean? That was inevitably going to happen, and it was cool to see Sauron try to get in front of it.
Yeah.
And the way he got in front of it was actually because he's a wizard, so he has these powers, right?
Yes,
and so all he has to do is basically say I've been sent by the Valar.
Right.
And then,
create some lightning and clouds, give himself some
all
pointy
your candles
ears.
went out.
Dude, that's exactly what happened. That's hilarious. No, you're right. And it was very convincing, because he just looks like a good guy. Halbrand looks like a normal dude. He looks like a dude you'd want to watch football with, right? Like
Perfectly casted.
yeah, perfectly casted. He's probably a really nice guy in real life, and they're like, hey, you're gonna play the most evil dude in Middle Earth right now, and he's like, oh, okay, sure, whatever. Dude, you're exactly right.
It's one of the main reasons why I'm like so into this show. And I want to get into that in a bigger context here in just a minute, but like I'm really into this already.
The shape
And one of the
shifting is
main
cool.
reasons why is like, I mean, Luke and I, not exactly a big secret, we are big fans of the Sith.
Yes.
And one of the things that I love about the Sith is they basically enact their plans via subterfuge rather than sheer force of power. And there's like these interesting concepts, kind of like with Palpatine. Palpatine's just one of the greatest examples of this in cinematic history up until Disney took over, in the sense that like you saw him wearing his politician clothes for Naboo, and he's talking to Padme, and he just puts off this like completely harmless vibe. But then he can be like, and like all of a sudden you're immediately like, oh, scary old man, you know what I mean? And like Halbrand has that too, where like he kind of looks like just a normal dude, but then he also kind of has the evil eye. I think,
oh, he
going
does.
on.
Well, actually, for example, when he's trying to meet up with Celebrimbor for the second time, and he's like, let me up into your tower, and Celebrimbor's like, no, I'm not allowed to have relations with you, or whatever their weird term they were saying. I can't remember.
I can't.
And,
treat. I'm not allowed to treat with you.
Yeah, I'm not allowed to treat with you. I'm going to say that. I like that. Anyways, he essentially summons a rainstorm in order to make Celebrimbor feel bad for him. And what's so cool is
that was
every
him
time,
doing it because he was like smirking, right? When he was, like,
and then
up.
his
I think
eyes
you're
get
right.
really dark. Like the vessels around his eyes go like really dark.
Oh, I didn't even see that.
Yeah, he all of a sudden gets like a black eye for 5 minutes, and then it goes away. So yeah, and then also when he was his just like little blob amoeba thing, that was
creepy.
so cool.
So that was how
was so cool.
That was how episode 1 started, I believe.
Right. Yeah.
That
it
was
gave
a
the backstory
really
into how.
kick-in.
Right. Yeah. And it was such a great lead up into how he ended up on the shipwreck and how he, got to meet Galadriel like early on. It was such a good intro into what was season 2.
And Adar straight up said in season 1, like, I killed Sauron, and so you needed some sort of explanation for that, and that was well done.
By the way, the Sauron getting killed.
That was dope.
Oh my gosh,
That
he
was
got
cool.
stabbed like 16 times
And he still
had
killing
some
people.
lives.
Yeah, dude, that was gnarly.
Yes, and he was about to
he
get
basically
crowned.
turned into like a mass of like weird earthworms.
It reminded me of Venom.
Yeah,
from
it was Venom-esque.
from Spider-Man.
For sure.
Yeah.
The but that was a really interesting concept. Before we get into some of the other topics, so like there are two main things that have stood out to me, just like kind of big picture about this show that I've really appreciated. One, like, get me invested in the villain, like really invested in the villain, and I'm all in. Like,
that's a great
there's
point.
There's nothing worse than like when the villain sucks.
Dude, that was Acolyte. Like we really didn't get to meet our villain. We still don't know a lot about our villain, and we might never learn about the stranger. The other
Acolyte's
stranger.
a little different in the sense that I almost think the villain was the only thing that was cool about that series.
Yeah.
But like, I agree that they didn't go into enough detail. The examples I'm thinking of is like when you watch like a movie and they're like, especially DC in particular has really struggled with this compared to Marvel, where like their villains just suck and no one can really kind of get invested in that storyline. Like if there's like a real ominous and like detailed backstory to the villain, that will like cause you to experience as a fan of the show like a certain amount of fear. Like it's not like real fear, but it's like media fear, whatever you want to call it. But like
an interest.
An interest, and like that drives it to a certain extent. And then the second thing that really stood out to me is like Rings of Power season 1. You and I were watching House of the Dragon season 1 at the same time, if you remember, a few years ago when that was going on. And I remember both of us were like not quite as into Rings of Power as we were into the other things we were watching at the time, because it was a little slow moving, and like the whole Harfoot storyline was really slow, and like
that is a little slow.
The Numenor storyline was slow. Everything was moving really slow. And one of the things that I've grown to appreciate is like this season has been a lot of shit happening really fast.
Almost too much. Like I can't, you can never make us happy, right?
Yeah.
But it's been so much. I showed Jason my notes leading into today's pod, and I was like, there's no way we're using this right. And it was like a page worth of just notes. And he's like, yeah, no, we're not going to use that. Yeah, it literally looked like a medical chart. Yeah.
But like what I appreciate is like everything carries so much more weight. So for instance, like we're watching like this coup that's happening in Numenor, which we're going to get into some more detail in a little bit. But like in this coup, it's like you have this like much more of an emotional attachment to Elendil and Miriel because you know what they went through over when they went to go visit the mainland. Like when you're watching even just like the disagreement between Galadriel and Elrond, it's like really bizarre because Galadriel was the one that was like super hesitant around Sauron at the beginning, and then Elrond was the one that was kind of dismissing him, and now they're like switched places, and like they've taken so much time in detail to kind of like establish these backstories, little things like
even
Galadriel
Theo
was a pain in Gil-galad, the king of Lindon. She was a pain in his ass the entire season 1, and now they're like kind of on the same team
because they have to
be.
Yeah.
And so it was just a casual reminder of like we need to all just kind of like give these shows, especially ones that are obviously going to be multiple seasons, like let them tell a story in season 1. It's going to take a little while. There's a little bit of a slow burn, but like there usually is a payoff, and like it's cool to be here in season 2 now, and I'm enjoying the show so much more than I enjoyed season 1.
Oh, for sure. It's the epitome of world building. Which is why you and I are actually doing this pod. Like, literally, we loved the world building of original Star Wars so much that we drove our wives crazy when we talk about plots, and they'd be like, hey, you guys need to do this elsewhere. So we did it elsewhere. So it's so exciting to have this show do such a good job with their backstories, their character development, and their world building. Yeah. Really quick, when you're talking about villains, for some reason, the Green Goblin came right into my brain. And obviously, you know, the world building for Spider-Man is a little bit different, but for some reason that just hit me like a ton of bricks, where I'm just like, yeah, like you get to see where the Green Goblin like originates from. You get to see his inner workings. You get to kind of almost like root for him a little bit.
Yeah.
And he was like literally one of my he was one of my first favorite villains I've ever had, aside from like Star Wars villains like Vader. So
there's always a connection with Spider-Man villains too, where like they all kind of like have like a side of their personality, like a secret identity that always happens to be someone who like is loosely connected to Peter Parker, like through like a friend, school or something like that.
Dude, and what's so funny too is I've never talked about Spider-Man our entire times at Two Sons, and now I've made 2 comps this episode. It's so weird. Anyways, the villain. I'm a little bit pro Sauron. Can't believe I'm saying it, but I kind of like his character. He's cool.
That's kind of what I've been trying to express to you with Star Wars, with like some of these characters, where it's like I'm not saying like I'm rooting for the Sith or anything, but like they tend to be the more interesting.
They're
characters.
pretty interesting.
Darkness and Flaw. It's always more relatable, and there's something to be said about like those kinds of characters, like just kind of resonating with people, not because they're evil, but because they're just like fascinating.
It's just interesting.
And
he's done a great job. Like we were talking about Sauron's plot, right?
Yeah.
This is a great intro to that. He is doing everything correct, right? Like everything. He has Celebrimbor like wrapped around his finger, and it's almost comical because it's been multiple times where he's like, well, no, you wouldn't want to know what I have to say, Celebrimbor. Like I'll just pretend read a book until you really ask me, and then I'll tell you. And then he's like, well, you know, Gil-galad said not to make rings for other people, so how do you feel about that? And then Celebrimbor is like, well, F that, let's make some freaking rings. Like, let's do this, you know?
He appealed to his talent. Like, it was very much like you have accomplished something that no one else has accomplished. There, I mean, you even heard, what's his face? The dude, Círdan, the guy who was the one who was supposed to dump the rings in the ocean.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
By the way, really cool scene. And it reminded me, it was a huge callback to the original Lord of the Rings, where, like, one of the things that happens in the original Lord of the Rings is, like, everyone's all game to destroy the ring until they see
until they touch the ring.
I mean, they just kind of like go into a trance.
Like, oh, this is pretty nice.
And that was cool. Like he's like getting ready to dump it, and then like something happens where like the water, I can't even tell what
there was. Like a big wave.
Yeah.
I was like, is that a giant fish? I don't know. Something took his brain off of throwing it into the abyss.
And then like the bag cracks open a little bit, and he gets a glimpse of the light just coming out, and then he like immediately gets like swayed by it. I mean, and that's a super fascinating like kind of concept. But like
to bump off that really quick is in one of the scenes, Galadriel walks into the room and Gil has his ring on and he's looking into it. And then she walks in and he like looks up
and he covers it
because he was kind of like lost in it.
Yeah.
And it's already happening where he's just getting sucked into this ring, and he's only had it for days at this point.
Oh, dude. And like even Galadriel in, I think it's in the Two Towers when they leave, when the whole Fellowship of the Ring actually runs into her. No, it's in Fellowship of the Ring, where Frodo ends up like having a conversation with Galadriel, and he offers her the Ring of Power, like the actual Sauron's Ring of Power, And when he offers it to her, like she has this moment where she like
Oh,
starts
right.
communicating with the spell, and it gets all dark, and she's like Middle Earth would have a queen, like,
Yeah.
and she's like talking about how she'd be wise and powerful, and it's like kind of like intense and like
It's
I remember
gnarly.
seeing that for the first time when I was a kid and being like a little freaked out.
Oh yeah. Yeah.
And like, yeah, like the rings. There's such a cool like concept behind these rings in the sense that they're like really a power that no one should ever have trifled with. I mean, even the Sauron's like kind of situation. What's fascinating is he gets stabbed 75 times. Like, there's no living being that could ever survive something like that. But his blood just kind of like leaks down, and then he venoms his way out of the cave. Like, but then what happens is he ends up tying his life essence to the Ring of Power, and so then when Frodo does finally destroy the ring, he dies. Like, he actually does die.
Finally.
And like that's like even Sauron, his commitment to the rings ended up being his undoing at the end of the day. Which
That's
is like,
a really good comp.
It's like
Yeah.
it's kind of like a fascinating concept. But to your point about Sauron's plot, like I was joking with Luke when we were putting our notes together. Like, it just, there's this concept like this happened in Star Wars, and this is a huge part of the grand plan, which I loved, which is like, and Palpatine and Plagueis would have these long conversations, and you'd read about them in the Plagueis book or listen to them in the Plagueis audiobook, where it's like, in order for the people to accept us as their ruler, they need to be in a certain state of desperation.
Right.
Like, and when all else has failed, and like we're completely at war, and they're literally invading Coruscant, and blah blah blah. That's the only way we can get them to actually vote you enough executive power to become the emperor, like to be able to actually execute your vision of flipping over the galaxy. And like, that's kind of a similar concept in this, what I'm seeing here, which is like, in order to get these realms, the realm of men, the realm of the dwarves, and the realm of the elves, to actually embrace Sauron's idea to build these rings, he had to drive all of them to the brink. And so, like, we see in Linden, the tree is dying, so the elves are up against it. They've got to do something, right? Like, the dwarves in I think it was in episode 2 today, like, their light shafts crumble. They're now all of a sudden they don't have food. The people are revolting. There's like even like a squabble within the royal family. Like, there's all this shit going on. Go to the men, and it's like they're literally like in a civil war right now surrounding this Adar character. And so like and then even Numenor, like as we talked about, there's like
the political coup.
Which is fascinating because it's like literally being led by Isildur's sister.
I know.
Like one of the main driving forces.
I know. That was such a bummer when she chose the wrong side. Right? Like, she comes off as this potentially like just abundantly likable character, but then she's really just a huge thorn in Muriel.
I think it was a combination of two factors, though. And her name is what? Irian?
Irian, I think.
I think it was two things. I think it was the conversation with the king when he died, where he basically said, like, don't go to Middle Earth. It's all that awaits you there is despair, blah, blah, blah. And then Isildur dying.
Yeah,
and I think it clearly bothers
dying.
her that Elendil doesn't even talk about him and like all this kind of stuff. And so I think that's what kind of kicked her over the edge. And I mean, she straight up lied, because if I remember correctly, I don't think did Muriel end up using? She did. She did use the Palantir.
She's used it. I think.
Yeah, that's when she saw the flood, right?
Right,
I think.
And I can't remember the specifics. But
that was in
and then
season 1.
She obviously was very pro Seeing Stone, because she was like, we need it.
Yeah, we need it. Yeah.
That was such a bad argument. When she's in front of everybody, and the cat's out of the bag now, and then she's like, but we need it, and everyone's like, what? Like, this is freaky.
There's something to be said about the perspective of boots on the ground, though. What I mean by that is, like, all those people in that room, none of them were there.
Yeah,
none of them were there. None of them see what's happening.
And she was there.
And she was there.
She
and
gave up her
was
vision.
there.
She almost gave up her life for it.
Yeah, and so like she's like, guys, like, you don't understand all of the shit that's about to go down and blah, blah, blah. But like, these people, it's like, it's a combination of like grief from a specific person who had a powerful piece of leverage to use, and then a political entity in this, what's his name? Pharazôn.
Yeah.
This Pharazôn gentleman who's apparently the queen's cousin. He is very much like just power hungry and going after it for purely. And I mean, we even heard a conversation between him and his son in season 1 where he straight up said like he wants to go to Middle Earth to like basically settle it and make money off of it. Like, he wants to basically colonize
Solid dude.
Middle Earth, right?
Yeah.
So Numenor's got this coup. Even the orcs are like divided because like they like obviously the they find out that Sauron's still alive from Sauron, as you pointed out. Sauron shows up to Adar and is like, you know what, you got to watch out for Sauron.
I know. I was like, does he know?
And then, but then, like, even some of the orcs are like, we don't even want to fight. Like, we got our area here. We got, like, Mordor. Like,
There's
don't
the orc
wanna
with
do
his little
shit.
orc family.
Yeah.
He's got his little orc baby.
Yeah, little orc baby.
Dude, I love the orcs.
that was the funniest thing that stood out to me in season 1. Like, literally, we get on the show, you go back and listen, and Luke would just be like, dude, the orcs look awesome,
The
man.
orcs are cool. Dude, even the orc dog. What I'm sure there's a name for that.
The warg.
The warg. Of course there's a name for that, right?
You don't remember in Two Towers when Legolas
No, I remember now.
they take on the
But
wargs in the
The warg was so cool.
The wargs are cool.
Yeah, and then Halbrand, just uses the warg to get back at what that one guy, Adar's right-hand man.
Yeah, Halbrand, it's hard to even like kind of gain a perspective on the scope of Sauron's powers at this point.
Right. It's pretty impressive.
Which is interesting to say the least. But anyway, Sauron's plot is very simple. Like, drive everyone to the brink of disaster so that they're begging him to make these rings. And like what the best example of this is like the Khazad-dûm situation. So like in Khazad-dûm,
I agree. That is the best example.
Durin the prince wants to mine the mithril because he wants to help his friend the elf, and he thinks it's going to kind of like take the dwarves to like a new era, right? And his dad's like, no, it's unstable. We can't do this. This is a bad idea. And then all of a sudden, like, there's this really interesting scene when Prince Durin finally apologizes to his dad, where he's like, Dad, like, I don't trust what's happening in Eregion.
Yeah.
And then all of a sudden, we fast forward, and there's King Durin
and they
making dwarven rings.
I know,
Durin,
with the mithril.
Prince Durin sitting in the background with this like scared shitless look on his face.
Yeah, him and Elrond or is that's how you say it, right? Yeah.
Elrond is his friend.
Yeah. Him and Elrond are pretty much the only people that are seeing Sauron's BS.
Dude, Elrond,
the only ones.
Elrond, his episode 1 where he's making his case for why they should not mess with these rings is so cool because it like, first of all, he's just right. Like he's just right.
You think so?
Yeah, he's right. He's absolutely right.
So that was one of our points that we wanted to talk about.
Okay.
I'm not entirely convinced that he's right. So why do you think he's right? Why they shouldn't play the game?
So because
this is a super interesting topic, and this is essentially what Lord of the Rings centers around this season.
So
because I can start with my argument if you want me to.
So I'm guessing your argument centers around the idea that if they didn't put the rings on, the tree and Linden would die and the elves would have to leave anyway.
Yeah. It's almost like
that's a good point.
There's a game that's already been laid out, and to not play, you'd die. So you might as well play. It's kind of a nasty little game. It's like Saw. But
it's like put on the rings and it's like shit's gonna go crazy. Yeah, but maybe you guys will win.
Either way, this is really bad. But and at the end of the day, they still win. Like at the very, 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 very end of the day. Yeah, at the very, very end of the day. And that's honestly my argument, because if they didn't play, things would have gone to hell anyways. And I don't know if there's a better argument, because I agreed with you initially. I was like, why are you even doing this? Like, listen to Elrond. But then I was like, well, what would happen if they didn't play? All of this still would have happened, and they still wouldn't have had any power.
So we don't have all the information yet. That's the one reason why I'm kind of leaning more towards being on the fence, and I can see your perspective. And the main thing that I think makes that interesting is if you remember in Lord of the Rings, the actual movies we watched when we were kids, Galadriel still has her ring on. And obviously, there is a very clear distinction between the way the elven rings were made and the way these dwarven rings were made.
Right.
The elven rings were made by, what happened was they had a piece of mithril. They had the sword or the dagger that Galadriel got from her brother. Halbrand did say to Celebrimbor, like, hey, maybe you should try mixing the metals. And then he also further gave them advice by saying, maybe not use pressure, maybe just use heat and mix them together, and maybe that'll work better. So, like, he gave him some specific, like, smithing advice. But when push came to shove, Galadriel exposed Halbrand, and Halbrand left. And then they finished the rings without Halbrand, and, like, they made the whole thing. There was this really weird moment at the end of episode 3, and I'm not sure if you caught it, where Celebrimbor, like, gets the mithril and goes to, and then Halbrand's like,
yep.
like, or I should say Halbrand, I should say.
Sorry.
what's his name? I'm blanking again. ANNATAR.
ANNATAR.
ANNATAR sticks his hand on it, is like, nope, I'm gonna go ahead and take that. And then he does this weird thing where he holds it, and then he kind of like closes his eyes and then like drops it,
and then drops him into the cauldron. Yeah.
And so here's where it gets interesting. So as we know, the nine rings that are made for the men, because I think it's three for the elves, and then it's
3, 7, 9, right?
Is it 7 for the dwarf lords?
I think so.
Yeah, so it's something like that. It's either 3, 5, 9, or 3, 7, 9, whatever it is. But like, there's the 7 dwarf lords, right? But like, you have these 3 elven rings, and Galadriel clearly. I mean, we don't. Maybe we'll find out in this season what happens when the Ring of Power actually is on Sauron's finger.
Mm-hmm.
And Galadriel has hers on, if he has any power over Galadriel. That'll be interesting to see. But like, the kings of men who wore it literally became his like mindless dragon riding servants, So like,
there's a big difference.
Exactly. And so that here's the thing. To Kieran's point, his whole thing when he had that whole thing was like, oh, like what about that poem you like from that drunk guy or whatever? Yeah,
that was the worst
reasoning. Yes.
I'm glad you brought that up. Continue on.
And like literally when he said that, I was like, it has a few too many to drink, or like the Dark Lord from the Abyss. Like it's a little bit different. But there's kind of like that in that conversation, like he's kind of like hitting at like, was Sauron directly involved with the making of the rings? And they're like, no.
Yeah.
And so if it's true that the elven rings in particular, while also being rings of power, are not under a very specific Sauron spell, then I have to agree with you. Well, because that's just a counterbalance.
Correct.
In that sense.
And the elves are a little bit more resistant to the personal desires of men, and it seems like dwarves as well.
The elves do not think very much of men.
No. Would you? Why would you? I mean, if I was an elf, I'd be like, yeah, humans suck.
It's like, first of all,
I'm a human though.
First of all, you die. Okay.
Yeah. Y'all don't live for forever. Let's start there. No, but really, I mean, from what I understand, the elves are less permeable to selfishness than humans, especially. But then I think the dwarves as well.
They are definitely pretentious.
Yes,
but like it's
deserved. It's well
deserved. That's the
deserved.
way they set it up in the story. Is like, these are deservedly pretentious people. Like
have you seen these people fight?
It's
pretty
not
badass.
Like Jedi. Like, how like the Jedi in Star Wars are very much like, we have all these powers, but like we're gonna treat you guys as equals. Like the elves are very much like, get away from me.
Yeah, no, I agree. That's a perfect way to say it.
So we've talked about whether or not to use the rings. We talked about Sauron's plot. Two more things we need to hit. Isildur.
Yes.
So, as we know, Isildur eventually becomes the king of Gondor. I'm really curious to see how that specifically gets drawn out, because I remember when I was watching in season 1, Elendil, who is Isildur's father, was a high-ranking military official, but he was not royal blood, from what I understand. Now, there is something to be said about the Númenórean blood, in the sense that I think those dudes live like 500 to 1,000 years. Like they live a lot longer than like normal men. And that was kind of the thing with Aragorn. If you remember, Aragorn was like he was like 160 years old or something like that in the Lord of the Rings trilogy. So like he has a certain amount of like that natural Númenórean blood, which has been blessed by the elves, because it like basically the general idea is like the Númenóreans were the ones who sided with the elves in the war against Morgoth. Right. The Southlanders are the ones who sided with Morgoth in the war against the elves. Yeah. And so like they got blessed with like longer life and this fancy island where they can go live, and an eagle visits them every once in a while. So, but like, I'm curious, because Isildur was not royal blood, but he becomes royal blood in this place. And so what I'm wondering, if like the general idea is going to be like Isildur does some stuff for these Southlander people and essentially gets revered as like, clearly this is like a superior man, let's make him king. Yeah. And then I wonder if that starts that lineage, and then that's how that goes.
His character overall is super likable and very, very interesting. And obviously he has his faults, which we learn about later on down the road. But his plot line is super cool. Starting with his horse, I think, is the best way.
His horse,
his Barrack, I think, is the horse's name. That horse is badass. The horse like wouldn't go, with the rest of the troops, and they just let him free. And then he goes and finds him. He impales an orc on a tree, and then pulls another orc through a stump to kill it.
Yeah, like drags him into a stump.
Yes, and then directly after that goes into a spider den and like kicks some spiders as well.
Well, and he like stomped on the nest to like free Isildur. Like that horse, like good for Isildur for going back.
Amazing horse.
Isildur would literally have had his insides sucked out by a group of spiders if it wasn't for Beric.
I know.
It must be named, Luke won't get this reference, but he must be named after Beric Dondarrion from Game of Thrones.
Yeah, I can't.
He's like, I don't understand. Isildur, by the way, it's a really interesting story about how like he drowned, almost died drowning when he was a kid, but his mom saved him, and then his mom ended up drowning, and then he like didn't tell them that it was because of him. And then he's like, I thought it was really fascinating that he was like, I just have to do something like of significance to make like save, and it's like he actually ends up making one of the bigger fuck ups in the history of Middle Earth, which is like when he like stands in Mount Doom and goes like, I'm gonna keep it.
I'm gonna keep it.
Isildur, the bookends on that life are less than great.
What do you think while we're talking about Isildur, what do you think about Theo, and what do you think his trajectory is?
I think that that moment where he caught Isildur talking to the secret Southlander chick, where the one that has the brand on the back of her neck,
who unbranded herself.
Just
good for her. That's hard to do.
They're like, what happened to the back of your neck? Definitely not a brand over the Mordor brand.
Yeah, but
I fell backwards.
I fell backwards in a fire on my knife. My knife was in the fire.
And then at some point in the past, I had another burn from a completely different shape. But like when he's listening, like you could tell he completely relates to that story because he's the one who fucks up in season 1, if you remember.
And then his mom dies
mom dies. Yeah. So like I think that might be a little bit of a turnaround for him. And I think that Isildur is viewed as an antagonist in the grand scheme, obviously because of what happened. Antagonist is the wrong word, but as like one of the people who makes a mistake in the Lord of the Rings trilogy. But I think they're going to make Isildur.
I think he's a protagonist with
Theo
fault.
A protagonist. Like I think they're like relatable, flawed protagonists.
Right. Which is I think a very good storyline.
No, I totally agree.
Yeah, very good storyline.
I'm really excited to see where that's going. My guess though is that Isildur ends up basically kind of like becoming the leader of the Southlanders through earning their trust through.
I think through righteous events. I think he ends up being a great guy. I think at the very end, he has his big mess up, but don't we all?
Don't we all? I'm actually so. Before we get to the stranger for a few minutes,
the other stranger,
the opening scene of the Fellowship of the Ring, which I'm pretty sure I've shown you, is the one where Galadriel is narrating and she tells the story of the War of the Rings and like how Isildur defeated Sauron. That Peter Jackson did an unbelievable job in that scene. Between like Sauron in the flames, like lifting his finger up when he made it, all the dwarven kings and the kings of men and the elves holding their rings up, and like then the massive battle on the slopes of Mount Doom when it's like all of the armies of Mordor versus the armies of men and elves and dwarves all together, blah blah blah. It was like a really well done scene, but it was very short. Like it was like a 30-second scene,
right?
And I'm wondering,
it's like very
if
like
Bezos,
storyteller vibes.
I'm wondering if Bezos views that as like the kind of like the grand finale of this show.
Oh, where
not
we
necessarily
actually get to
this
see that
season,
battle.
but like not necessarily even that battle, but the entirety of that war. I think it'd be really cool because all the characters at play are there. Elrond fights in the battle on the slopes of Mordor. We have an Elrond. Isildur fights on the slopes of Mordor. We have an Isildur. Sauron fights. We have a Sauron. Like I think it'd be really cool for them to kind of dive further into that and like. Honestly, like it kind of fits the bill for what this show is, which is the most expensive television show ever made in the history of mankind. And so why not go for broke? You know what I mean?
I'm all for it. And for whatever it's worth, and I'm sure there's people that hate it just because that's how things go. I'm really enjoying it. I think that this has the vibes of the most expensive show ever made.
Oh yeah, it looks fantastic. Like just little stupid
incredible
stuff. I'm like, this whole spider scene is like 100 times better than like the weird moths that we saw in the Acolyte that were like super CGI.
Oh gosh,
yeah,
dude, you just ruined my night,
dude. I remember this from season 1. Like for all the flaws in season 1, it was very slow moving and it obviously took some time to get our attention. Season 1 looked beautiful.
It did.
It really looked beautiful.
Well, and they're doing a great job of capturing the scale, which is another area where Acolyte completely failed.
Yes.
And for the record, Jason and I enjoyed the Acolyte mostly. But they are getting the scale correct.
Yeah,
it feels huge. It feels
It doesn't look
massive.
cheap.
It doesn't look
doesn't
cheap.
look like
it doesn't
they
look
blew
like
through
it
their
was,
budget.
Yeah, it doesn't look like they filmed it all in an egg. You know,
Exactly.
like the Acolyte. Like it feels big. It feels grand. It's capturing the ultimate plot, which is true good versus true evil, and it's been an absolute blast.
The story of the Stranger was a really, really interesting kind of example of what I was talking about earlier, in the sense that the the first season was $465 million, making it the most expensive television series ever produced.
Oh my
the
gosh.
massive figure doesn't even include the $250 million Amazon paid for the rights for Token. But yes, 465. So that's 2.5. That's a good two plus times as much as the Acolyte was. But then again, it doesn't look cheap though. It looks like money well spent, for the record. So the Stranger in Nori, and we know the Stranger is Gandalf. Like that's pretty strongly
right
into
where they're playing around like what is your name, and they're trying to come up with all these BS names.
Yeah.
And he's like, no, none of those sound right yet.
yeah,
like, Gandalf. Yeah, like, Gandalf's about to get dropped.
It ain't gonna be Gerald. Okay.
No.
Like, and the
Diesel.
Diesel. What's the one from Guardians of the Galaxy 3 or 2? It's like Taserface. Taserface. So, they did, like, Bradley Cooper's just making fun of him the entire time. So, that whole Nori and the Stranger kind of relationship, you're immediately invested because they spent so much time building that out in season 1. And they finally explained some of the backstory. So these 3 witches that came after him in season 1 turn out to be acolytes of this guy who's known as the Dark Wizard. As Luke did some research and discovered that he's just referred to as the Dark Wizard.
No, that's thanks to Amazon and how great it is that if you just push the down arrow as you're watching each scene.
I love that.
It's so good. It's so good. So if you just push the down arrow, then you can see everyone's name, which is great for a show like this.
Oh, absolutely.
I wish Game of Thrones had that.
So Rune is the name of this place, and it's basically I looked up on a map earlier today, and it appears to be like to the north and to the east of Mordor, and it's clearly like a desert land, right? Yeah. And in this place, there's this Dark Wizard, and they clearly are serving Sauron in some way, shape, or form, because we know that from season 1 when the 3 acolytes, as we find out those are basically acolytes of this Dark Wizard, but they end up essentially finding the Stranger and being like, hey, you're Sauron, you're Sauron, come back from the dead, like we're here to help guide you to your full Sauronness, until they find out that actually he's not, right? And they don't go too much further into it in the first 3 episodes, but essentially, like, they do eventually end up hiring, just like not hiring, but just like having this like random group of looks like local mercenaries or local.
They're really
could just
cool.
even be locals.
Yeah, they're super cool looking dudes.
Yeah, they kind of, you know what they reminded me of is a little bit of like the chick from the Solo movie, the girl who's like that has the freckles, who's like kind of serving the rebellion, and she wears that crazy mask. I'm surprised you don't remember.
Dude, why
this.
isn't this coming? I love Solo. I love Solo.
Story.
I'm sorry, Jason.
Yeah.
That's on me, dude.
It's okay.
That's on me.
It's okay.
I'm sorry. I love Solo.
It'll come to you later. I'll show you a picture of her. But the they end up
I know who you're
showing up.
talking about. I know exactly who you're talking about. That he has this like history with, and he kind of hits on her at the end, and she's not into it.
She goes by Enfys Nest.
Yeah,
that's what her name.
She's so cool.
Nest.
Okay.
Yeah, and like you like the
I'm thinking of someone totally different.
Yeah, it's like the
no, I know
the
exactly who you're talking about.
Like when I saw that's what I was literally thinking of when I was seeing that.
Doesn't he have a love interest in that in Solo too, and he's kind of hitting on her? And that's who I was thinking of. Yeah, Enfys Nest is like a little girl at the end of the day, and she's wearing
So, but anyway, that's what those guys kind of look like, and that storyline, it was kind of predictable. I'm like, okay, of course he's gonna wizard his way out of the situation. He ends up tornadoing them out of.
And we don't know where. No, well, we don't know where Poppy is and where Nori is.
Yeah, that is clearly
sucked away into the abyss.
Mm-hmm. But I think where that story ends is pretty obvious. Like eventually, like Gandalf is going to get his staff, and when he gets his staff, that's going to be the thing that allows him to control his power.
Yeah,
and then when he's able to control his power, he suddenly isn't going to be as rough around the edges with the girls as he has
Right.
been, and then from there, I think he'll eventually end up meeting up with some of our main characters at some point.
You know how little kids just like need their thing. Like Graham has this stuffed animal that's like I don't know how we ended up with this, but his favorite toy right now is a house cat stuffed animal, and why that's his thing, it is. But it's like his little feel good thing.
It's like Gandalf's name. It's like you don't choose it; it chooses you. You know? Like the little cat thing.
The little cat from IKEA. Seriously. But Gandalf just needs his feel good thing, which is just a staff. Turns out his staff does absolutely nothing. Wizard. It just makes him feel good. It's a pacifier.
It just helps him calm down.
Yeah, it's his calm down. Yeah, his comfort staff.
But any other like big picture thoughts about the first 3 episodes?
No, I'm so invested. I'm so enjoying this. It's great.
And for you guys, the plan as of right now, we're actually going over to your house to watch football on Thursday, which is going to be really exciting. I'm very excited.
I'm so stoked for
this
year.
Luke, even though it might keep him up a little later than he might want to, after the game is over, we're going to watch episode 4 of Rings of Power, and we're going to record that night. So you guys will get a more consistent schedule from now on as we over the next 5 weeks with these episodes. It just, again, like it was like you ended up working the whole damn weekend, and then on Sunday, what do we have on Sunday?
Marcus's
we had that party for our buddy. Shout out our buddy Marcus. He finished number 1 in his class for captain certification. He's a firefighter here in Tucson. Literally one of the smartest people I know. I was super proud of him. We were literally talking the day before he got the results. Remember, we were just like, Marcus is going to finish number 1. And then he did. It was so funny.
I'm sure it wasn't even close.
Oh, dude, yeah. Just super bright dude, super hardworking. Literally, I look up to him a lot. He's a great guy.
Yeah.
But anyway, we had that on Sunday, and then you were working, and it just was a complete shit show. I didn't even get around to watching the episodes until today.
I called you after my shift, after seeing like 60 people in a day. And I just called you. I was like, "Hey, Jason, there's no way I'm gonna hang out with you tonight." I ended up
getting that voicemail the next day, and when I got it, I was like, "Oh, dude, I was like, I wouldn't have been able to go."
Did I sound dead? Dude, because I was dead. I was hurting.
I've known Luke for a long time now, and he used to be in primary care, and Luke is one of those guys that like. Similar to Marcus, just puts his heart and soul into what he does. That's why you two are such close friends of mine. Like it's the same thing I do with my show.
Right,
like,
of course. I'm thinking
incredibly
about your show.
different lines of work. And to be clear, like what you do and what Marcus does is way more impactful and important on society than what I do. But the point is we all take our
touch millions of people's lives.
About a game where I put a ball in a little metal ring. But anyway, all 3 of us take our jobs very seriously.
Yeah.
But like when Luke was doing that. He was so deliberate about treating every patient with like the top level care and like follow up and it consumed your life.
Right.
And honestly, like that I since you've gone out of that line of work into a different part of the medical field, like those days are few and far between.
Right.
Where I would see that. But like when you were working in primary care, like every time I saw you, you looked like that.
I was anemic. My personality, my soul, my spirit was just anemic. Like that's the best way I can explain it. Like I was still Luke, but it wasn't my best self.
You looked like a plant that was a little wilted all the time.
I just needed a little bit more sun.
It's so crazy though, because like we always, it's
other
like
Luke.
When you made that change, how long ago was the event?
It's been about 1.5 years where I switched to like urgent care.
Yeah. And in the last 1.5 years, it's I always feel bad because you and I were always best friends before that, but like it's just like you just seem like more of yourself. You know what I mean?
Yeah, but that's what I like about our relationship too, is because I knew you before you were famous, and I knew you're getting there, and it's cool that you and I both knew ourselves kind of in like a different life, and as like we've gotten better at doing our lives. Like we've only gotten closer, which is really cool.
I think our younger selves would be very proud of where we're at.
I think they'd be pretty stoked. I think our wives would be very stoked with like their friendships together and stuff. Like this has been a lot of fun.
It's been cool. It's been a long time since it would have been about it would have been around 2014, so about 10 years ago that I came over to the Swan House and you were studying.
Yep.
You were like, "What's up, bro?"
The Swan House is a non-legit fraternity house, essentially. No, it's this house that our friend's dad owned, and then throughout the years, like a quarter of our friends ended up living there.
It was like a total shithole in like a dumpy part of Tucson, but it was a perfectly fine place for college kids to live.
Perfectly great. I don't know
Luke
how
ended
our
up moving into the room
survived.
that I used to live in.
Yeah, it smelled. Just kidding.
Jason, you left his stench all
Yeah,
over
there's a
it.
weird smell.
But anyway, yeah, it's been fun. And
Yeah.
then I was looking. You and I are getting close to 200 episodes now too.
We've
been doing this a long time, and
cranking it out. And then the new studio. We've been talking about this new studio for a long time now.
We are going to do it.
We're actually on the brink of doing that.
Yes. All right, guys, that is all we have for today. As always, I sincerely appreciate you guys for supporting us and supporting the show. As I mentioned, give us about 2 days on Thursday night. It'll be pretty late. It probably won't be coming out until like probably 10, 11 o'clock at night Pacific time. But we'll have an episode on episode 4 of Rings of Power. And then we'll try to, at some point, like add in some additional Star Wars stuff too to kind of get it. I'd love to get back to bi-weekly if we can. I mean, even if we just record it all at once. But we'll have plenty of content coming out over the next 5 weeks. Again, we appreciate you guys, and we'll see you in a couple of days.
Thanks a lot.